Welcome ladies and gentlemen, another year has come to an end and it's time to list my favorite games of 2016. There's a lot of potential games missing from this list and there's multiple reasons for it. Maybe the game was just utter disappointment, maybe the game represented some genre I don't play all that much, it couldn't fit to my tiny SSD, would have made me feel even more stupid than I already do, a game series I lost my interest in many years ago, was too expensive for my poor ass at the time it got out, or simply just slipped under my radar. Anyways, here are my favorite games of 2016. Imagine a game having only boss fights and nothing else, but those boss fights are fucking great. What do you get? A pretty fucking great game. From the developer Game Bakers comes Fury, a boss rush game, meaning that all you will be doing in this game is very long boss fights with their multiple phases and abilities. The combat system of Fury combines different elements from different action game genres like twin stick shooters and bullet hell games. The game gives you all the tools you need from the very beginning, which is great so that you can start learning all the elements of the combat system right away and how to use your different tools in different situations. You have your melee attack chains and rapid fire laser pistol, which both have charged versions for more powerful attacks. You can dodge around and parry melee attacks, which leaves the bosses open for your attacks, or use the parry to deflect back enemy projectiles. All the bosses have multiple phases, where the bosses' abilities are usually showcased procedurally, starting from the more simple attacks and then adding more into the mix as you enter the later phases. This is a very natural and satisfying way to learn to fight the different bosses, and it's supported by the system where if you lose the given phase of the boss, you lose 1 health bar, and the boss gains 1 health bar, followed by the phase you failed starting again, or if you happen to win the phase, you regain a whole health bar yourself and enter the next phase. This gives you the opportunity to try all the phases multiple times, but also rewards you for succeeding on your first time and trying out a new phase, offering a chance for a comeback. It's a very fair way to treat the inevitable trial and error that goes into learning all the new types of attacks that the game keeps throwing at you. The combat system can feel a bit outlandish at first and the game is not the easiest out there, but overall it does a great job of telling the player what is going on. There's a big flash and an audio cue when you need to parry, the bosses always glow orange when they cannot be heard, and projectiles with different properties are color coded, etc. While the first boss of the game works as a tutorial and gives you a good welcome to the game's mechanics, not all the features are actually mentioned in the tutorial. For example, I was at the 8th boss when I first learned that during melee phases you can push your thumbstick down to buff your damage output to ridiculous amounts as long as you don't get hit. I cannot remember this being ever mentioned in the tutorial. One more thing about how the game handles difficulty modes is that it was a pleasure to see that different difficulty modes in the game actually have some changes to the bosses, instead of just cutting your health or buffing the damage output of the bosses. This makes the game have even more replay value if you're looking to challenge yourself.
運命なんてない。道は自分で切り開くんだ。
In terms of combat sections, this game only includes boss fights, but in between of these boss fights there's always these segments where the main character just walks to the next boss, while your weird bunny man companion rambles a bit about the next upcoming boss. While I enjoy looking at the abstract set pieces that Fury takes place in, and these pauses give you a little breather between the long demanding fights, I just wish the gameplay would have been more interactive during these segments. You have the option to just press the button down and the main character walks to his destination automatically. And I actually highly suggest doing this since the camera that constantly changes the different fixed view can really fuck you up if you don't. I started to play this game by hot seating it with a friend and taking turns after each death, and it was an absolute blast to learn Fury this way. It has one of the most enjoyable and satisfying combat systems that I have ever had the pleasure to experience, and the action is backed up by a great soundtrack, composed by multiple electronic music artists.
Yes, indeed. It is called Lothric, where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge. In venturing north, the pilgrims discover the truth of the old words. The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones.
It's really difficult for me to start talking about Dark Souls 3 and still keep it relatively short but informational and not break into hugely detailed ramble about every tiny little aspect of it, since as most of the people who have followed this channel know, I'm a huge fan of this series and have ridiculous amount of hours clocked in each of the Souls games in both PvE and PvP. But I'm going to try my best to keep this as short and float as close to the surface level as possible while talking about this game. In short, Dark Souls 3 is a dark fantasy action RPG, where instead of doing quests and having long conversations with NPCs with multiple dialogue options, which would be typical for just about any other RPG, in Dark Souls you actually focus on action. This means that while the game does include some short cutscenes, and yes, there's even some NPCs to talk to, the great majority of the time you spend in the game is by fighting monsters and working your way through the dangerous different areas like undead villages, swamps, catacombs and castles. Like in most RPGs, you start by creating your character from various different starting classes like Knight, Thief, Sorcerer, etc. But in Dark Souls, starting class only determines your starting stats and equipment. But you can level your character exactly the way you want while progressing through the game, and no class is ever locked away from any options available in the game. Since Dark Souls 3 is mostly about combat, it's very important that the combat system is engaging enough. And luckily, it is just that. There's a huge arsenal of different weapons, armor, shields and magic you can find or buy from vendors. Your weapons have light and strong attacks and can be one or two-handed for different kind of moves. But in addition to this, Dark Souls 3 added a new feature to the combat system, in a form of weapon arts, which are these weapon-specific special attacks that cost mana points to use. The way combat works in Dark Souls is to get to know your tools and manage your stamina, when you should block or dodge roll your enemy's attacks, or when to find openings to attack or heal lost HP. The combat has a nice amount of depth and weight to it, and beating that boss or a section you have been stuck on for hours feels endlessly satisfying, since you feel that you as a player are getting better, because leveling up your character only gets you so far. However, it might take a bit to get used to all the elements of the combat system. Staying aware of your surroundings at all times helps you not to get overwhelmed by too many enemies at once and to avoid ambushes and traps. If it wasn't apparent already, Dark Souls world is a deadly one and it enjoys the reputation of a hard game series. But difficulty in Souls games has always been mostly fair and about learning from your deaths. Dying is not a failure, it's expected, and it takes you one step closer to understanding how to tackle different situations. Dying does however come with a price. There is no save scumming or any kind of manual game saving in Dark Souls, and if you die you drop your souls to where you died with one chance to retrieve them. Souls are the currency in Souls series and are used to buy stuff from vendors, but also to level up your character. If you die on the way back to retrieve your souls, you lose all of them. Visually, Souls games have always clicked with me hard, and Dark Souls 3 is no exception. Dark Souls games have always had this undeniable atmosphere, and the dark fantasy art style by From Software makes the game look appropriately beautiful, scary, cool, or even strange, sometimes all at the same time. The monster designs are amazingly varied, as well as the different areas of the game. Level designs in the game are not only impressive visually, however, and those are also expertly crafted, with often having tons of hidden spots to find, sights to see, and multiple layers to explore. Dark Souls 3 is sometimes called an open world game, but this to me sounds a bit misleading. Sure, you can take a couple of different branching paths in the game that take you to some places before than others, that are accessible at the same point of the game, but really Dark Souls 3's world consists of very distinctly different areas that connect to each other with a boss in the end of each area. So it's not like your typical Elder Scrolls type of open world, where you can just go wherever, whenever. If the Souls series is famous for anything else than its difficulty, it's the innovative online features of these games. The developer From Software's goal when creating online features for Souls games was for players to have this vague connection to other players while they play through the game. As far as you're connected online, you can sometimes see other players' fandoms, or see bloodstains on the ground where you can see the last moments of a fellow player to alarm you from upcoming dangers. You can read messages that other players have left to the ground that might be helpful or misleading, and naturally you can write these messages yourself as well. On top of this, you can join different covenants through the game that either let you help other players or invade their worlds in aim to kill them. There's even a covenant which tries to protect you from invaders. In terms of the story, Dark Souls 3 also follows the same footsteps as the previous titles, meaning that there's very little to it when it comes to apparent plot of the game. But if you're interested in the lore of the world, there's tons of depth there. You just have to find it for yourself in a form of item descriptions and some vague dialogue you hear from NPCs. So if you want to get something out of Dark Souls 3's story, you need to work for it, but if you choose to ignore it, it's also made very easy for you. Dark Souls 3 is definitely a true Souls game, with all the core elements still intact from previous titles. But its welcome might have been overshadowed by Bloodborne a little bit. Another game from Software that came out only a year before Dark Souls 3 that already showcased the upgraded graphical fidelity, faster combat pace and more varied combat movesets and boss phases. So when Dark Souls 3 came out, these changes were not as fresh anymore. But all in all, Dark Souls needs to be experienced, because a lot of criticisms and praises I would like to give to the game would demand me to go into the finer little details that only make sense to those who have played the earlier games in the series and spend a lot of time with these games, since the devil is truly in the details when it comes to being a fan of these games. But I'll just settle to say this: Dark Souls 3 was a great finale to end the Dark Souls trilogy with, and it's endlessly satisfying and beautiful action RPG of which combat depth outshines most of the games in its respective genre, with unique online features and masterful level design. I highly recommend everyone to experience Dark Souls for themselves, because only so much about these games can be described. I really liked Limbo, an atmospheric 2D puzzle platformer from developer Playdead. So I was really excited when I saw the trailer for Inside, a new game from Playdead that was coming out 6 years after Limbo. Already in the trailer, Inside managed to create this very mysterious atmosphere, and I was dying to get to play the game to find out what it's all about. In Inside, you play as a nameless boy character who finds himself escaping a mysterious organization deeper and deeper into the belly of a beast. Gameplay-wise, Inside is really simple. You can move either left or right, jump, and interact with different objects. That's it. Like in Limbo, most of the gameplay comes in the form of solving puzzles. These puzzles come in nice variety, but they were quite a bit more easier for me than what we saw in Limbo. While there is nothing exactly wrong with the gameplay of Inside, to be honest, I don't think that's the strongest strength of the game. What I was most immersed in when I played through the game was the dark atmosphere, beautiful animation work and art style, and most of all, the huge mystery that the whole game is. What is going on? Who is the boy? What is this mysterious organization and why are we being chased by them? While I progressed through the game, it just kept getting more dark and twisted, and the game's world just completely sucked me in. And at the point where the game got to its freaking amazing final act, I was filled with even more questions and burning desire to know more of what I just experienced. What I see a lot with Inside is people either completely loving it or just ending up not getting it, and I think a lot of that has to do with your ability to get immersed to the world and mystery of Inside. Some might say that there is nothing more deeper than what meets the eye in the game, but I don't quite believe in that in a game that has been worked on for 6 years. Inside is just roughly 3 hours long 2D puzzle platformer with almost no real replay value, so in a sense it's hard to sale pitch this game to someone who has not even heard about it before. But there is no way I'm spoiling anything about what awaits in Inside. It was, however, an experience that has stuck in my head for a long time even after 100%ing it.
Guilty Gear Xrd.
It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of Guilty Gear all the way since junior high, and my totally biased opinion is that it's the best fighting game series of all time. Guilty Gear Xrd Revelator is the second installment in the Guilty Gear Xrd series that took the old Guilty Gear X series to modern times with its genius art style that uses 3D models in a way that still makes it look like a 2D fighter. This gives the game an opportunity to use its 3D graphics to make some special moves and cinematics pop more, while keeping the 2D playing field like it has always been in Guilty Gear games. As a fighting game, Guilty Gear falls under the subcategory of air dashers, so there's a lot of freedom in movement and the speed of the game is rather hectic in comparison to a lot of games in the fighter genre. In order to get the most out of Guilty Gear, you're required to learn quite many different mechanics of the game, and it's definitely not the easiest game you can pick up. But it does exceptionally good job of explaining different mechanics of the game with practical practice mode tutorials that showcase different situations that can happen in a fight and how to counter them. Overall, Arc System Works have taken steps to make this series that enjoys a reputation of a hard and complex fighting game to appeal to new players more, and even included a new stylish game mode where combos and special moves are easier to pull off. This is however balanced in a way that eventually it's more beneficial to start learning how to execute stuff properly, but it might act as a good push to make new players to see what they can potentially do in the game. One of the greatest strengths of Guilty Gear for me has always been the varied cast. In comparison to previous Xrd game, Revelator has added 6 new characters so far, increasing the character amount in the game to a total of 23 characters. The game is incredibly balanced considering how completely different every character is in the game, and Revelator actually rebalanced the whole cast, so it's now also a more balanced game than ever. As new additions to Revelator, we also got a new story mode that is this couple of hours long anime movie that is rather average as an anime, but it's still nice to see your favorite characters interact with each other, and the animation work is also improved from the XR Design story quite a bit. There's the new model viewer mode where you can inspect the 3D models of the characters and even create panoramas for them, and I don't know what the fuck is it with Japanese people and fishing, but that's also a thing in Revelator. You earn this in-game currency you can use to buy alternative character colors, more songs and all sorts of other collectibles, but if you want to, you can also go fishing for random rewards. There's a new revamped online lobby system as well for playing against other people or to create your own private rooms, and I'm happy to report that the netplay holds up the connection really well with very little frame delay, if you're at least somewhat geographically close to your opponent. Of course, you also have your arcade mode for all the different characters in the game that tell a small story leading up to the events of the story mode, and replay theater where you can watch your past matches that will be recorded there automatically, and a library where you can read more about Guilty Gear's history and characters. Guilty Gear XR The Revelator is just a complete fighting game package with amazing complex combat, great mode variety and tutorials, varied cast, kick-ass music and gorgeous visuals, and can now be enjoyed by pros and newcomers alike.
あなたの眼差しは暗海を避けていないし、見ようともしていない。きっと気づきもしない。強い人ですね。
That we're all too swiftly taken from it. We age, we decay, we die. But what do we leave behind? Bones? Dust? What of the soul? Does it endure beyond our earthly existence? I believe it does. A truth lies at the heart of many myths and stories. A truth not of science, but something more profound. The key to unlocking everlasting life.
Rise of the Tomb Raider is the second part in the reboot series of a classic action-adventure game series Tomb Raider. I spent my childhood with the first Tomb Raider games and enjoyed the first reboot game a great deal, so naturally I was excited to play the Rise of the Tomb Raider. What they're obviously aiming for with the new Tomb Raider games is to make Lara Croft more real and relatable character than she was in the earlier games, where she was like this overly sexualized shallow main character. Developers have somewhat succeeded in this by making Lara a bit more fragile and emotional, but I still wouldn't say she's the greatest character design, and her motivations for doing some of the things she does didn't really convince me one bit, and the character just ended up feeling really inconsistent. Usually I wouldn't even focus on this kind of aspect when talking about video games, but since the developer Crystal Dynamics clearly wanted to draw more attention to Lara as a character, I think it deserves to be talked about. Amazingly high quality motion capture makes the character's facial expressions really deliver what they're feeling, however. So in that part they nailed it, and the voice acting is pretty good as well. To me personally, however, the story of the game didn't feel all too interesting, but luckily Rise of the Tomb Raider is a video game and not a movie, so let's get into what's actually good about it as a game. The core elements of Tomb Raider games have always stayed pretty much the same. The gameplay consists of platforming and climbing sections, solving puzzles, finding treasures including ancient relics or materials to upgrade your weaponry, and of combat sections mostly against other humans or some kind of wildlife. I find all these different gameplay elements rather great actually. Exploring different beautiful areas varying from snowy hilltops to ancient temples to secret tombs was fun because of the good level design. And usually the puzzles feel organic to the actual environment you're exploring. Like, sure, some of the puzzles wouldn't maybe make much sense in real life, but the way you use the elements provided by the environment to solve the puzzles managed to feel real within the game world. At times your peaceful exploration is stopped by combat sections, where you use cover and different tools to take down your enemies. In these combat sections you usually have the choice to either go in guns blazing, or take more sneakier approach and kill your opponents silently from the shadows. You have pretty satisfying variety of different weapons available for a game like this, like pistols, assault rifles, shotguns, and of course your bow for more silent kills. You can also craft different throwable items or special ammunition to either distract the enemy or blow them up. There's also a melee combat element to the game where you can dodge your enemies and punish them with a stylish melee attack. You gain experience points from finding treasures or killing enemies. This XP is used on your checkpoint bonfires to increase Lara's abilities that range from utility upgrades like being able to use your hunter senses to highlight more points of interest on the map, to combat upgrades that make you more specialized in using certain weapons. The art style of the game aims for this more realistic look, and oh boy can this game look amazing. If your PC can take it, the game can probably be one of the best looking games out there at the moment, when it comes to graphical fidelity. But it demands a lot from your rig to show its full potential. The game does have some kind of multiplayer PvP mode as well as expedition mode, but sadly I didn't have time to test those, but I bet those can increase the replay value of the game a bit. Rise of the Tomb Raider, while not having too many original ideas, is just a pretty damn solid action-adventure game, and its different gameplay elements keep you busy even if the story or the characters wouldn't captivate you. Challenge freaks might need to crank the difficulty up in the settings though, since the game can feel a bit too easy at times.
No turning back. It has to be here.
Thumper from developer Drool is a weird game. One could call it a rhythm game since the gameplay consists of you constantly moving forward with your silver beetle, hitting buttons at the right time to stomp or drift along the walls while you travel towards the unknown on a seemingly endless highway to hell. Why I wouldn't call Thumper a rhythm game, however, is because while the game starts in a way that levels follow a certain rhythm, some later levels get so goddamn hectic that any sort of real rhythm is hard to recognize from all the chaos, and you have to deal with only visual cues to aid to survive, and it's fucking glorious. The soundtrack and the look of Thumper are really unique, and some have even called it a horror game. The menacing bass-heavy music colors very sinister atmosphere, and you cannot help but to start nodding your head to it while not blinking, so you can nail all the hits that come at you with the speed of light. It's truly a hypnotic game to play, that's pleasing for both your eyes and ears. When it comes to the controls of the game, you only need one button and your thumbstick or D-pad or whatever you prefer, but the challenge of the Thumper comes from the game constantly presenting new challenges and a lot more speed. I can promise that the last levels of this game are quite something to experience in terms of how hectic it can get. The game is clearly designed for those high-score perfection freaks in mind. If there's something I want to give the game a little bit of criticism about, is that the boss creatures that appear in the end of each level, while at first looking really cool, could have used a lot more variety. Thumper serves as a prime example of how extremely exciting gameplay experience you can create with such simple controls. Salt and Sanctuary from husband and wife developer duo Ska Studios is a game that was told to combine elements from Dark Souls, Castlevania and even games like Devil May Cry when it was still to be released. Luckily, they delivered on this, because Salt and Sanctuary is very ambitious 2D action platformer RPG experience with surprising amount of depth. Story of the game is very vague. You're on a ship that is delivering a princess to a marriage ceremony, when the ship gets suddenly attacked by a huge sea monster, resulting to a shipwreck. You wake up washed up to a shore of a mysterious island, and decide to find the princess. Here begins your adventure. You start the game by creating your character from multiple starting classes, and are given later the option to serve different creed, that is kind of a faction that also somewhat changes the gameplay experience in the future. The world structure of the game is a very Metroidvania style, with its separate areas including a boss at the end of each one. And through learning new special powers like mid-air dash, you can access later areas that were off the limits earlier, encouraging exploration. You also open various shortcuts connecting the areas that ease your backtracking. The combat has satisfying amount of variety. You can block or parry hits with a shield, or dodge roll through them, you can combo different melee and secondary weapon attacks and cast spells. There's also a bunch of different weapons, armor and magic available in the game. However, the way that the game's skill tree system is set up, it's rather hard to create effective hybrid builds that would specialize in multiple things, at least within the same playthrough. And when I did my first playthrough, I also had the feeling that some classes were a bit unbalanced, but this might have been fixed by now. When you die, you spawn back to the last sanctuary you visited. Your salt that acts as a game's XP gets sucked up to the nearest enemy creature, and you get one chance to retrieve it and kill the enemy creature to get your salt back. If you die on the way there, you lose that salt forever, reminiscent to how souls work in Dark Souls games. Sanctuaries that act as sort of checkpoints in the game are actually rather interesting. You can claim these sanctuaries to your chosen creed. You can then choose to put down different offerings to these sanctuaries that you can find, to give access to different NPC vendors. These offerings also give some bonuses to you in the area where the sanctuary is located, like better drop rates, more salt or gold gained, boost to attack power and so on. There's also a way to increase your devotion to your creed that will give you access to rewards like more HP or mana potions to use. There is more to this sanctuary system, but unfortunately I didn't explore it deeply enough on my first playthrough to tell you more about it, or about the multiplayer option tied to the sanctuaries, since I never tested that either. Other features borrowed from Souls games is that people can leave messages down to the ground for other players to see, as well as see glimpses of other players running around the game world at times. The art style of Salt and Sanctuary is very unique with its almost paper-cut drawing look. That would almost be cute if there weren't so many dark dungeons and scary monsters out there. Sometimes a lonely guitar riff creeps to the background of the soundscape, but mostly the air is filled with only your lonely footsteps and the sounds of combat. Music kicks in only to underline the action in the boss fights. All in all, Salt and Sanctuary is really well done Metroidvania, filled with different monsters to kill, areas to explore, exciting boss fights and ways to build your character. It blends some things from different games that I love together into a really satisfying and surprisingly complex game with its own identity that I would highly recommend to fans of Castlevania and Souls games. And that's it! Those were my favorite games I got to play on 2016. 2016 wasn't maybe that great year for gaming as it was hyped up to be, because of some disappointing titles and some games being postponed to next year. But the games on this list made it worth for me. And the 2017 is filled with promising titles which I cannot wait to get my hands on. Let me know which games impressed you the most this year. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.